In the third part of this Chapter 11 material, we're going to talk about objectives as well as activation and evaluation. So objectives of strategies or reason, in other words, the way to look at this, the reason why sponsors invest their marketing dollar with global sport partners is often because of the objectives that the overall organization has. So one thing I want to cover is kind of this terminology. The most important firm strategy for engaging sports sponsorship are improving the company's image and the target market itself. So in other words, I want to partner myself with a sport team or an event because it fits well within my own target market approach, as well as it enhances the company's image I have, or the company's image in the minds of consumers. Many times sports fans are just that, fans of a team. They're very emotionally connected. They have positive emotions that go along with that team. So why would a company not want to be associated with positive images associated with a team? It enhances their image. It also gets them in front of fans that are in the similar target markets. And so most of the time when you look at types of companies that are spending in sponsorship, most of the time there is a fit between the fan that's sitting in that seat or watching that game at home and the company's products that are being produced. So, but what are the specific objectives firms identify when trying to achieve these previous two strategies of enhanced image and target market fit? Well, first we need to tie it into potentially when you're creating a branding campaign or marketing plan for your organization, there are certain terms that we want to talk about. The first is strategy. Strategies are overall for the organization. This includes our objectives and our tactics. Our objectives are how to achieve the strategy, and the tactics are actions that we use to achieve the objectives. And so this is a top-down approach. We have strategies first. Those strategies are then achieved by the objectives that are created for the campaign. And then the tactics are the specific actions that are done to achieve the overall objectives. And so our top-down approach of understanding objectives is generally how we look at most campaigns. So what are some of the common objectives for sports sponsorship spending? Why do companies spend money or their marketing dollar on a sport property? Well, one of them is they want to increase their global awareness of the company. Why would I spend money on the World Cup? So that people around the world know who I am. Another one is identifying a specific target market segment. I know people that watch the Olympic Games through NBC Sports, we'll say, has certain characteristics. And those characteristics may fit within my company's overall objectives. And so therefore, that is why I spend money with the Olympic Games through NBC Sports. I also may just want to be involved in the community, right? And this comes back to what I'll mention here is called the Minigan model. The Minigan model is a good understanding of how a company will hopefully view a sponsorship so that it can be effective. Essentially, building goodwill with consumers of the sporting event is the way that you have an effective sponsorship. And so, there's two different ways, or actually there's lots of different ways you can look at a sponsorship. This is a really complicated model. And so when you're looking at it, what I want you to really focus on is the right third of this model. You can see sponsor, process, and response. I want to focus today on the response. There are two things on this model. On the very top of the response section, you see intensity of contingent goodwill, and it has an arrow that's pointing right. Essentially, the higher level the goodwill in the minds of the consumer will be to the right. The lower level of goodwill in the minds of consumers will be on the left. So, well, let's define goodwill. What does that mean? A goodwill is basically a feeling that the company is doing it for the reasons of being a partner with the organization and not just to make money. If a consumer feels like a sponsorship is in place, I see an ad on outfield wall purely because they want to make money off of us, the consumer, or off of the team, then there's going to be a low level of goodwill. If the company does a good job of investing in the foundation, for example, and activating the sponsorship, which we'll talk about in the next video, actually at the end of this video, then we may have a higher level of goodwill. Now at the bottom of this response section, you see another arrow that points to the right, probably right into my head. But that is the intensity of fan involvement. In other words, the higher the level of the fan involvement, so let's say a season ticket holder that goes to most games, they're probably going to be very involved as a fan, right? They're going to be very engaged in the brand. They know about the team, how well they're doing. They watch the games on the road, that kind of stuff. As opposed to somebody who maybe goes to one game a year. And that would be somebody on the very far left of this. And so we've got two different arrows. We've got goodwill going to the right, and we've got fan involvement going to the right. Well, let's look at it in the example of a sponsorship. All right, so here we go. There is a company called Deloitte. Deloitte is a company that has a lot of different services. But they're an official sponsor of the Olympic Games, or the IOC. And so we have at the top Deloitte, the sponsor, and their job is to create goodwill in the minds of consumers. And on the bottom we have what's the symbol of the Olympic Games, which is, we'll say, the average, it will be a fan, okay? Somebody who watches the games, either at the event or on television. So Deloitte's job is to try to get to them to buy their product, right? That's the whole purpose of a sponsorship, because it's an it's a marketing dollar that's being spent. And so the middle part of this, we've got different columns. One column we have awareness, then we have favorable disposition. Favorable disposition basically means I like the product. It's not bad. I'm not necessarily going to buy it, but it's not bad. Then we have transfer of value or value images. Image values. In other words, when I think of this brand, I think of this image. So in this circumstance, when I think of the Olympic Games, I think of Deloitte if I'm in that column. There's also intent to purchase. So the consumer intends to buy the product. That's not the same thing of actually buying it. We talked about in the AIDA model, a desire is not action, right? And so our ultimate goal is get them to actually buy our product. And so what we're going to talk about here is a scenario where Deloitte, in this circumstance, has a low level of contingent goodwill in the minds of consumers. What they've done is they put some signs on a couple of the venues, and they ran a commercial on television, one or two here and there. They have not done much to engage the brand in this scenario. Well, the average everyday fan, somebody who may watch one event, maybe the opening ceremonies, or may go to one event, is your casual fan. In their minds, you're pretty much going to create awareness, right? Low level of goodwill with the lowly involved fan is going to have awareness, which may be your ultimate goal. Again, the AIDA model has a lot of different processes in place. In this circumstance, it might achieve the first A. But hopefully what Deloitte's trying to do is try to increase their contingent goodwill. Get them to the point where when I think of the Olympic Games, I think of Deloitte. Right? I want to think of that product as embodying the images of the Olympic Games. Well, still for that average everyday fan that just comes once or twice or watches one or two events, you might have a transfer of image values, which is still better than just awareness. You're moving them toward an actual purchase, but you haven't quite gotten them there. So really what a sponsor is trying to do is trying to get high levels of contingent goodwill in front of highly involved fans. The Olympic logo may have just gone behind my head. But the point is, if I do that, then I can have an actual purchase, likely have an actual purchase. The fan, that season ticket holder, the person that goes to every event, watches every event on television, sees Deloitte actively engaging in their sponsorship activation, will have a high level of contingent goodwill amongst highly involved fans, and therefore will have an actual purchase. That is our ultimate goal. Well, what happens when that highly involved fans views the sponsor as having low level of contingent goodwill? This essentially says, thanks for your marketing dollar in the event that I love. I appreciate you being a part of our brand, but I'm not going to necessarily buy your product. And so what we're trying to do here is, again, as a marketer, try to have a high level of contingent goodwill amongst the highly involved fans. So what are some of the common objectives for global sports sponsorship? One of them is to showcase the unique product features. And so sometimes you'll see things such as GE, I think is still an Olympic partner, showing off some of their technology and how it's used to help the games actually work. It may be a common goal would be sales. Maybe I'm just trying to increase sales in a product category, and so I have opportunities for sales. Another one might be exclusivity in a target market. I know my competition is trying to do the same thing I am, so I will spend an extra $1 to be an exclusive partner for the games. I told you the example of what Adidas did with the World Cup. They were the exclusive partner of the World Cup in Brazil, yet the most commonly thought of sponsor was Nike. It didn't exactly work for Adidas in that circumstance. I mean, they had benefits from it, but if that was their goal, it didn't exactly work. The opportunities for hospitality may also be a thing. So one thing that happened in London versus Russia is that for the Olympic partners in the United States, many of them tried to send their company executives as well as their suppliers and customers, big high rolling customers, to the games as part of a hospitality suite. So essentially, let's just say it's P&G is a sponsor of the Olympic Games. Normally what we'll do is set up a P&G tent at the Olympic Games. All the partners, customers, as well as suppliers, we bring them to the games. They have a good time. We build that relationship. It's part of the hospitality of the business side of P&G, Procter & Gamble, that is. Well, that was really easy for London because transportation to London in 2012 was really easy. Well, in Russia, in Sochi, one of the problems was it took forever for somebody to get to the Sochi Games. I think I read something along the lines, if you were in the middle of America, it would take up to 18 to 20 hours just to get from your front door to the Olympic Games because of the amount of time it took to get there. So people weren't as excited about going to the Sochi Games. And so what the Olympic partners did is host watch parties, which is the image I have here. They hosted Olympic watch parties for the Sochi Games for their Olympic partners and made a big deal of it. So they can still have some sort of exclusivity and hospitality in that. The other one would be a common objective is entitlement or naming rights to an event or facility. All right, so now we know what their objectives are. How do we go about proving or making sure that they actually occur? This is what we call activation. This is the most important thing to understand when it comes to activation. Sponsors have to pay a fee to be associated with a game. Remember, that's that part of that exchange relationship. Let's just say, for ease of math, I spend $100. Let's make it easier. Yeah, $100 on a sponsor. All right, I give the sponsor $100 for the right to put a sign on their court, right, or the right to put a television commercial during their broadcast. That $100 goes to the team. But there are a lot of costs that are associated with actually ensuring that commercial gets on television, that sign gets on that court. That is what we call activation fees. Sponsors pay a fee to the sport property, that $100, and then the sponsors typically spend an additional amount above and beyond that $100. So typically a sponsor spends about $1.90 for every dollar spent or every dollar paid to the sport property, and that is outside of what they're paying the sport property. So that $100 goes to sport property. Then about $190 on average will be spent on something else as it relates to that sponsorship. That includes the design of the logo for the sign, design of the sign itself, the printing of that sign in some circumstances. Or maybe I'm putting a commercial spot in. That 30-second spot takes money to be able to create. I want to have a specific message to sports consumers, and so I have to rework a commercial specific to that event. These are all what we call sponsorship activation fees. Activation is defined as the collateral communication of a brand's relationship with a property. What I mean by this is that it is the communication a consumer has alongside of the relationship they have with the team. How many times have you seen a commercial that says the official partner of the Olympic Games? Well, that commercial that you saw on television, or the official partner of the World Cup, that was activation. That was not part of necessarily the deal they had with the games, but what they're doing on the side to ensure that everybody that is watching the games sees them and associates them with high levels of contingent goodwill. It is also known as the extra investment needed to communicate the sponsorship to the target audience through different marketing channels. So, activation includes but does not limit several things: the design costs for print, broadcast, and broadband media, which I was just discussing. On-site activation, so artwork, the printing of signs, programs, and giveaways. Here's an example of installing a sign and the naming rights for a fitness facility. Right? That is part of the activation cost. And then any hospitality. Right? Maybe you want to have additional things that are handouts or hats or T-shirts. That all is in addition to the rights to do that. Because there are so many different costs that a firm has to pay as it associates with activations, firms are now trying to reduce their cost to the sport property. And so one of the biggest mistakes I made in selling a sponsorship that I like to tell students when I talk about activation and sponsorship sales is the term I did not use, and that is net to the sport property. I worked in baseball. This is a short story. I sold a sponsorship sign to an infield banner. This is one of the first ones I ever sold. It was a 3x5 sign that I put in the infield of this minor league baseball team. When I sold it, it was, I don't remember the amount, I think it was about $8,000 for the sign for the season. That was the cost that was due to the Express. However, I was using an ad agency. Well, the company I sold it to was using an ad agency. They took out the cost of activation, the production of that sign, the logo, and all of that out of that $8,000 and gave us a check for $7,200. I don't remember what it was. It was less than what was required. I brought it to my GM and said, I think I messed up. And he said, yeah, I think you did too. No big deal. But next time that you make the sale, make sure that the ad agency knows that the $8,000 is the net amount due to the sport property too, for us, the baseball team. And so the net profit that the sport property gets is usually spelled out in a contract. And so from then on out, we actually had some processes in place to make sure that didn't happen again. But think of it like this. The ad agency or the company's going to need to spend money. They're going to try to cut costs however they can. So to ensure that you're going to have a successful sponsorship relationship, you have to ensure successful activation. And so the sport property, so let's say you're working for the Olympics, or you're working for a youth baseball league, or you're working for a team or a fitness center, you have to do things that go above and beyond just the bare minimum of the contract. This is what we call over-servicing the sponsor. So when the sport basically, when the sports organization makes a deal, they do everything they can to be able to ensure that the sponsorship is being seen as an effective marketing strategy. Because again, it's a marketing investment. They want to make sure that there's good activation, good leveraging expenditures. They want to make sure that the sponsor has a lot of good communications at the facility itself, but also on the back end, documenting and following up on the back end of a deal. Most of the entry-level sports sponsorship positions are doing this exact thing, over-servicing the sponsor. This is where they essentially, if you're interested in working in the sport industry post-graduation, this is one way you can get your foot in the door. Search for jobs on Teamwork Online. Teamwork Online is a website for a lot of sports organizations in the United States, but look across the globe even. Look at jobs that have the word activation or servicing partner, activation partner, assistant. Basically, your job is to over-service the account so that they see there's a return on investment. So there's three ways that a sport property looks at whether or not it was a good investment. One is they measure the awareness levels achieved or the attitudes changed about the brand. So they do a pre and a post event survey. So how aware are you of P&G products before the Olympic Games, and how are you aware of P&G products post Olympic Games? If there's a change in awareness or attitude changes towards the brand, then the marketing campaign was a success, was achieved. Okay, that's where activation has to be put into place. They may also quantify the sponsorship in terms of sales results. So they look at their sales before and after the event. During a season of the English Premier League, I had $10,000 worth of investments. And it turned out that we increased our sales by $20,000. Okay, they may quantify that as well. Okay, well, there's a net $10,000. Was it worth it? Right? It's going to be a lot more than that. Sponsorships for the EPL are a lot more than that. Or the third way to do is compare the value of the sponsorship, the generated media coverage, the cost of equivalent space on something else. So I could spend $1,000 on a billboard ad versus on the team, and we call this our return on our opportunity. What could I have done, and what would the results likely have been? And they compare that with the results that was actually achieved.